and welcome to the Housing Hive for July. Wow, this is a superb attendance list. I know we've got a lot of people joining us today, so we're just going to take a few seconds while lots and lots of people join. Hello to everyone that we know really well. Hello to all the first timers as well. Always nice to see you all as well. That looks like the room's all there, Liv.
Yeah, I'll just let people in as and when they join.
Right. Okay. So welcomes to everyone. Firstly, thank you for joining us today. We've had a fantastic response to this session. I'm hoping that we're going to see nearly 60 people today registering from across the sector, which I say, I'm going to be honest, I think it says something about the topic we chose for today. So whether you're joining us live or you're going to be watching this on YouTube in the next few days, thank you for taking part. It really is a big thing that we do for the sector, and we genuinely believe it adds some real context of what's actually happening at the moment, and probably more importantly, those difficult conversations that that need to be had within social housing. Before we move on to the agenda, if Lynn could you just throw up the agenda for me. I just want to do a quick overview of today's session and what we're going to sort of cover and how it's going to run through it. As everyone who's been on these before, you know, we try to keep them quite casual. It's quite a fun, open place. We really want questions from you guys. So please, if you've got a question and you don't want to put your hand up at the end for questions and answers, if you put it into the chat, the lovely Liv or Joe will be more than happy to ask your question back to the panelist. But we're going to structure the conversation around three simple questions today. Firstly, and I think probably the big one for me, is there really a trust gap between resident and landlord? Secondly, if there is, where is the trust actually won and lost? And finally, what do we need to do differently as a sector? This is designed to be an open conversation rather than a series of presentations. So whilst we have some questions to guide us guys today, I really do want this to be an open conversation, and I'm hoping today's discussion just naturally develops into what I think it will do. As I said, if you've got any questions whatsoever, guys, please just push them into the chat window. They will be asked at the end. We've already got some questions being submitted from the sector already, which I will cover off, and then Liv will come through with any questions specifically for the panelists or myself. Share your thoughts, put any reactions you up. We always like to see reactions come up when someone's talking. It gives the panelists opportunities to get feedback from you guys, what they're saying and how it's resonating. So please use the chat functions and the emojis as you see fit. We deliberately protected time. I had a couple of calls after the last session where I unfortunately ran out of time because we got into quite a heavy debate. So I've got 12 minutes protected into the session for questions. So genuinely, we want to hear the questions, guys, because we think this is a really important topic. Very quickly about Prodo, I'm going to be 30 seconds here. For those of you who don't know or you're joining for the very first time, Prodo has been in the sector working exclusively with social housing providers for the last 26 years. We help organisations improve resident engagement, customer experience, service delivery through digital transformation and innovation. Housing Hive actually arrived from a much simpler idea. We realised that the most valuable conversations in housing, they don't really happen during conferences, doing presentations or formal meetings. They typically happen afterwards. They happen at the bar, they happen around water coolers, the moments that we all get together and have a little chat about what we're actually doing differently. And that's what we wanted this to be, a way for a digital format for the similar sort of thing. So Housing Hive was created to bring those conversations into the open. I am not going to sit here, no one in my organisation at Prodo will sit here and say we have all the answers, guys. We don't. It's about bringing people together from across the sector with different experiences, different perspectives, and a willingness to go and share some of those experiences so openly. So that collectively, we all leave with new ideas and maybe a slightly different perspective. And that's all this conversation is for, guys, is to have a slightly different perspective and look at the question that's been asked. If today's conversation encourages us all to think a little bit differently, where the trust is actually won, where it's lost, what each of us could do differently tomorrow morning, I think Housing Hive has done exactly what we set out for it to do. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce my amazing panel. I'm delighted to be joined by some people that I genuinely respect in the sector, but I've actually also worked with people very deeply. Kerry, I've worked with really quite intensely. She probably hates me, in fact, doesn't ever want to see me again. But Kerry's from community housing, brings resident insight and a different perspective to this conversation to do with the evidence that's gathered. Through her work across complaints, tenant satisfaction measures, consumer insight survey, customer journey mapping, Kerry helps translate really complex information to meaningful understanding of what residents are actually experiencing. I mentioned I some work with Kerry. Recently we worked together on residents and colleagues and how they experience the customer journey across all different types of engagement, complaints, repairs, but looking beyond individual measures to understand the completely lived experience and whether their feedback genuinely leads to visible change. So Kerry's going to help us explore a really important question today. What are residents actually telling us? How do we know? And are we measuring the right things? Secondly, I've Colin from Bromford Flagship. Colin, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're very busy at the moment with all new AI innovations, but Colin brings an operational customer transformation perspective. Colin has extensive experience across customer operations, service design, customer transformation. Trying to remember what you do, Colin. Alongside, probably to me, what I think is actually really important at the moment, the practical application of digital technology and AI to improve customer service and customer experience. How fragmented services, repeated contact, disconnected systems, inconsistent information, we've all heard it, we all know it, we all experience it. But how do these actually affect our residents? Colin's going to help us explore why trust is actually won and lost during everyday interactions with residents. And finally, Ian. Ian, I've actually not had the pleasure of working with yet. I'm very hopeful to have some time with Ian at Karbon. But Ian serves as the Executive Director of Customer Services at Karbon Homes. He brings almost 3 decades of housing experience. And this is what I love about Ian. It's from the front line of housing. Ian's gone through all those journeys. So he now brings that strategic leadership perspective to the discussion this afternoon and helping us understand whether organizations can meet their targets, achieve compliance, and still find themselves struggling to earn genuine confidence and trust of residents they serve. And the reason we've got these different people is because I've been working with an organization that's just been given a C1. It's a fantastic result for them. It's an absolutely fantastic result. Unfortunately, when I then went and spoke to their residents, the feedback from the residents was completely different. And this is where I believe this breakdown is happening. We're using metrics and standards to judge reality of human behavior. So really excited for this conversation. I'm hoping it's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, so that's enough about what we're here to do. Let's get kicked in because we've got a tight schedule. So as you can imagine, the people we've selected bring both resident insight, bring data experience, bring operational transformation and executive leadership. I think this is going to really help us get to the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about. And I suppose the first place to start is, well, what's the most fundamental question, which is the topic of the conversation. So to the panel first, when you first heard the title of today's Housing Hive, The Great Trust Gap, Why Residents Don't Believe Us Anymore, what was your immediate reaction? Not your corporate reaction, but your personal immediate reaction. And if you can each just give me like 90 seconds, guys, on what you sort of thought. Kerry, I'll come to you first, and I'll give you the pleasure of speaking first.
My immediate reaction was the title was probably deliberately provocative, but in reality more nuanced, because I believe that there is a trust gap for some customers, but not all customers, for not across every service or every interaction. I look at feedback in different guises. So we do look at positive feedback, such as compliments, and we have good, satisfaction results, particularly where the service is straightforward, completed promptly, and explained clearly. I think the gap tends to emerge probably when issues become more complex, more prolonged. Customers are having to chase for update, repeat information, move between teams, and not know what's happening next. but I do think it's repairable, and I think that trust can be rebuilt if we provide some clear ownership, keep customers informed, and deliver what we promise to do, and then use their feedback to make sure that we're getting it right.
Awesome. And Colin, from your side, what was your thoughts when you saw it?
Thank you for that. I think I probably just took a step back and read it a little bit more and looked into it, because I don't necessarily disagree with the challenge, but I'm not sure the entire question is fully there, which I don't think customers have truly stopped trusting housing providers. I think what has happened is, over time, confidence has just become more fragile. So I think overnight, trust isn't something that you lose. It erodes over time. And that isn't based on a single strategy or initiative. It's just through those hundreds of thousands of ordinary moments that exist on a day-to-day basis. So I think whether it's a promise kept or failed, or an honest update, whether it's a colleague taking ownership, which we all talk about so much, about how we want to own our customers' journeys, I think it's those moments, or in those moments, that matter, where trust can be won or lost. And it's those elements that I think we really need to think about, how trust and confidence are two separate things, but can be quite closely intertwined. So yeah, I think that's where it sits for me. Is it's not just trust; it's the confidence of, we're going to do what we said we did. We're going to turn up when we said we would, and we'll deliver the outcome that you expected.
Yes, thank you. And Ian, from your side.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Good morning, everyone. A bit like Kerry, I think it's a nuanced question. Interestingly, I went and did some research in our organisation, and trust has gone up over the last 3 years, so scores have improved. Yet I still think there's an issue. We do not deliver systematically excellent services day in and day out across the organisation. There are some things we do amazingly well. I hear fantastic stories. Customers give us amazing feedback. They're very grateful for what we do. And then I'll get a complaint across my desk that shows a series of failures, and somebody's massively frustrated and ends up emailing one of the executive team because they're just so desperate for an outcome. So we tend to do lots of things really well, and they don't get mentioned. We do some things that are brilliant, and they do get mentioned because they are so good. And then we do some things that are really not good at all, and they get complaints generated. So I think it's an inconsistency for me. So we don't have a systematic way as an organisation, or I think as a sector, of providing a great service all the time, every time. And I think that's where it affects us. But I think we're also affected by wider societal issues, the economy, behaviour of politicians, even war. You know, it's a series of bad news, and we've got an ombudsman who publishes stuff on a daily basis saying how bad the sector is. So I think confidence is naturally going to be eroded by the messages people hear, and those messages, predominantly at a global level, are more negative. And we're a society that sort of indulges itself in bad news. And I think that erodes trust and confidence at a more general level, and I think that transpires through our organisation.
It's really interesting, both Colin and Ian, you both used the same word that you did, or you all used similar words there, but one word that really struck at me was the erode word. Erode's a powerful word. And I know when you use, when you do different types of tonal messaging, you know, erode's a word that you sort of tend to stick away, walk away from, because it has negative connotations to it. It's interesting that you've both used that within the formulation of trust and what trust actually means, because I'm a big believer, and I think both of you are absolutely correct in this. I think once we've eroded it, it's really hard for us to rebuild it. Let me challenge that slightly with a different sort of type of question then. Do you think landlords and residents actually mean the same thing when they talk about trust? And that's probably, I'm going to put that one across to Kerry first, because Kerry didn't use the word erode, so I'm going to ask her.
Sorry, I missed the question. Sorry, something was happening outside.
Do landlords and residents actually mean the same thing when they talk about the word trust?
I don't. I think in ways, yes, and then in another way, no. I do agree that trust has been eroded. I think as a sector, we've moved forward. We have had to adapt and change. Obviously, we've had more compliance, but that is what our focus can be: is, are we compliant? Are we, responding to a complaint in 10 working days? Are we, doing a gas check, etc., etc.? But I think trust for a customer is much more detailed. It's what they feel. It's much bigger than that, because it's their home. And I think as a sector, we've become quite blinkered in that we need to meet all these objectives and targets, and sometimes that can feel a bit tokenistic to customers.
No, I appreciate that. So that's really true actually as well. And Colin, from your side, you raised the word erode. What's your sort of final thought on that thing? Do landlords and residents actually mean the same thing when we talk about the word trust?
I think I would agree a lot with what Kerry has just said. I think as landlords, we tend to measure it through dashboards, whereas customers actually measure it through their emotions and memories. How did we make you feel in that instance? Did we do what we said we were going to do? And I think for us, governance becomes trust, and part of that is, regulation, and part of that is the way that we act as an organisation. But the reality is, when customers talk about trust, it's just things like, can I actually rely on you? Am I going to get the call back? So whilst in certain instances we do mean the same thing, I think we look at it very, very differently. We look at trust as, governance and compliance and the way that we do things, and customers actually connect trust with emotions and the way that they remember how we delivered our services.
I think that links back quite nicely to a conversation I was having with someone who couldn't join today, Adam from Amplius, who's a customer services lead, and he used a really nice analogy actually, and he said that trust is all about an emotional bank balance. So it's all about how did you make them feel on your last interaction. It kind of adds to the credit or the debit, and I think that was really nice, and it's just popped into my head because of what you've just said there, Colin.
It's really interesting, because whether we believe trust itself is declining, or whether we're simply getting really good at hearing dissatisfaction or understanding it more clearly, the next question is, where is that confidence is actually won and lost? Where in the process does it actually happen? And I think when I look at this, we're a sector that loves regulation. My God, this is a sector that loves Excel spreadsheets. I mean, I sometimes wonder if Microsoft built spreadsheets for our sector. But when you look across complaints, TSM surveys, customer journey mapping, what signals tells you that the trust is beginning to break down? I think that's going to be my next question for this. So, Kerry, looking at all what you do, when you look at data, when you look at the TSMs, when you look at complaints, when you have to go and sit and tell your board what this is actually meaning, what are the signals that you're sort of beginning to see, or you've heard, that are telling you that trust is breaking down? If you can just give me a sort of, literally a couple of minutes on that.
Yeah, I think there's not one single measure necessarily on how trust is breaking down. I look at various different data from data sources, and then start looking at repeated patterns, and particularly with TSMs and complaints, they're often late signals. I think before a complaint is made, we've already had a lot of several warning signals, repeated contact, missed appointments, negative transactional survey feedback, customers asking several times what's happened, what's happening, and that's where the friction starts to become a trust problem, and customers feel that they have to manage the cases themselves. They become the case manager. And that trust gap becomes more visible when that experience is prolonged and fragmented, and they land upon this doom loop and don't know how to get off the doom loop.
So true, so true. And Ian, Come on, I want to hear it from the board's perspective. Does that resonate as an exec perspective? You know, can organisations sometimes think it's performing well while residents are experiencing something quite different?
The short answer is yes. Yeah, I'm increasingly concerned by how tightly regulated the sector is, and in some respects it's good. If you cast your mind back to the early 2000s when we were regulated, then it was very, very tight. You had quite formulaic ways of doing that, and people followed it in order to get a 3-star rating, and everyone was doing exactly the same thing. They made a period of deregulation quite strongly during the early 2010s, and then to come back strongly again post Grenfell, post our Bishop, and organisationally, the board want to know where are we, what's our quartile, what's our benchmark, how do we compare to others, but we're comparing ourselves as a sector against each other, and that's not sometimes a healthy place to be, because if you're just a bit better than somebody who's not doing very well, then you're not doing very well yourself either. So I think that's a concern for me. We also focus on things like, we've got 85% satisfaction on the repair service, and people go, oh, top quartile, that's great. Yeah, but if you do 100,000 repairs a year, that's 15,000 things you've got wrong. And we don't really look at it the other way around. So and that's 85% of people who are very unfairly satisfied. Fairly satisfied is a bit meh, isn't it? If you went for a meal and you went, I was fairly satisfied, you're not going to rush back to that restaurant.
No, you would not.
You're not going to go and tell your friends what a great place that was to eat. So you're not going to walk away dissatisfied, but you're not going to be an advocate either. So it sort of does really beg the question, how many people are really satisfied, are really happy with the service they receive? But the trust thing is, I think it comes from the board and the leadership team around setting the right culture. And that's really important. But this is one every single day, every single interaction, one at a time. And it's the experience customers have with our colleagues who are out there every day doing the job. And my experience is they're absolutely fantastic when they do that, despite organisational problems that don't get us there as quickly as possible and we don't do a good job as possible. What rescues us, I think, is the fantastic people who work for us and the work they do with customers and their relationship with them. It's almost sometimes despite what happens rather than because of what happens.
Can I just hop in there? Sorry, it was so interesting because we're having our feedback to our colleagues today on the customer journey mapping. We did 5 journeys all at once, which was really interesting to see, not looking at a service in isolation, but how they are all intertwined with each other. And I actually said to the director, and I don't know if you got this, Zach, either, but the passion that comes from our colleagues and people in the sector, they actually want to provide really good customer service, despite, systems and, breaks in journey, etc. And I think we don't communicate that enough with our customers, how passionate our colleagues are about providing those good interactions for customers.
I personally think the front line of social housing is probably one of the most underappreciated elements of what we do in the sector sometimes. I've been out on site with a lot of these people, and they have it's a very hard job. And anybody who thinks it's not, please go and spend a few days out on the front line and see what it's actually like out there. It is very difficult. They're dealing with a sector of society that we're trying to protect, that we're trying to provide homes and accommodation to. They have to deal with poor technical services, and I'm so coming back to you on this next question, Colin, for this one. They have to deal with data that doesn't exist or data that's incorrect. They're talking sometimes from what can only be described as best information maybe about 4 weeks ago. And they're having to go and talk to a customer and tell that customer something that's actually, to that customer, is really important. That repair on that leaky radiator that we've all okay, it's a 28-day fix on that. Well, that leaky radiator is actually ruining that lady's carpet that she just put down 3 weeks ago after saving 2 months to put it in there. There are actual issues that society finds, we wouldn't put up with that. Anyone that's cool wouldn't put up with that in their own house. We do expect our residents to put up with it. So, and I suppose it comes to my sort of next sort of natural sort of switch into sort of the next part of this sort of session, which is the gap between what our organisational data tells us and what residents actually experience. It's different. and I don't care what people tell me because I've seen it. I've been into a lot of your organisations. I've seen your data, and some of it's great, and some of it's all there, but it's so disjointed. It's really hard for people to understand it. Colin, when residents say they don't feel listened to, how much of that is actually a symptom of a fragmented journey, i.e. having to repeat themselves, chase for updates, move between different teams? Kerry mentioned it herself, she did move between different teams and the channels. And sometimes the same story over and over again, they constantly have to repeat itself. What, from your perspective, Colin, what are you seeing out there? What are you doing differently within your organisation to be different and try and listen to what that customer's saying?
So I think it's probably one of the biggest hidden trust issues that we have. And we often talk about things like customer effort, and what does that mean to customers, and we look at colleague effort, but it's actually looking at where the confidence is starting to break down. Every kind of transfer, every handover is somebody or us as an organisation effectively saying to the customer, no one really owns this. If a customer has to repeat something, we don't really know your story. So again, it leads into how well do we actually know our customers? And if customers chase us, we're not actually managing it because you've had to pick up the phone again. So I think operational friction ends up becoming a trust problem the instant that a customer has to start doing our job.
Interesting.
And the minute that we make that their problem, not our problem, that's when we start to see that erosion of trust and the symptoms of fragmented journeys starting to impact the way that trust is broken down with customers, because we're not connecting our organisations together. We're handing customers off to different teams and different departments, and that's their experience, and their journey doesn't follow through.
Would you blame that on, is that poor communication? Is the real problem there, or is it sometimes we blame we blame poor communication for actually what is an underlying service failure?
I think it's a melting pot of a number of different things. If I'm honest, Zach, I think it can be communication, it can be lack of process, connected processes, multiple systems that exist across the organisation that don't talk to each other. One of the biggest blockers that is spoken about quite frequently is things like budget. I haven't got the money to do that. It's going to have to be someone else's problem. We can't afford to pay for that. And then budget starts to seep into the way that we deal with our customers and the experiences that our customers feel. And because we can't replace Windows because they're on a program 3 years in the future when they absolutely need them doing now, that just erodes trust. And it's all of those small fragmented experiences and journeys that come together to really start to limit the trust that customers have in as an organisation in terms of, are we going to do what we said we're going to do? And the moment that customers start managing our processes for us means that we've completely stopped managing their experience.
Interesting. Very interesting. So
just to say, one of the things I'm thinking about a lot at the moment is about the customer of now and customer of the future. So 90% of our homes right now are allocated to people in band 1 and band 2 of choice-based lettings. And this is a very broad brush statement, so don't take it literally, but more and more customers are coming to us with complex needs. So those customers are interacting with social services, councils, children's services, NHS, and I'd imagine their lives will be incredibly frustrating, incredibly bureaucratic, and then they encounter us, who are probably not dissimilar because of the reasons Colin's just described. So it's not just distrust or dissatisfaction with us, it's probably a big thing in their lives in general, because they're trying to navigate lots of complex services and they've probably got all sorts of problems in their lives as well. And I think over the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to have more and more customers living in our homes who are like this and have those issues and vulnerabilities. And I don't think as a sector we've got our head around that yet, and we certainly haven't got a response. But I think that could exacerbate the problem.
Absolutely, I think it is without a doubt. It's that weird thing. We when we come up with topics for Hives and Hives. We want to start this type of debate, and I think you've just beautifully, both you, in fact, all three of you have done this really well throughout this sort of conversation. But Aileen, you've just set this up perfectly, because trust is just something right at the top. It's right at the top, or it's actually, if you do the classic sort of trust Mahoney thing, it's right at the bottom. It's the first thing that we have to build. It's the foundation that we build on, because everything comes from that. It does. And it's a classic thing at the moment. I'm seeing a lot of organisations. Everyone's talking about AI at the moment, and Colin, I'm sure you can come and jump in on this. But everyone is talking about AI, and we want to deploy it. We want to make it for our front line, so we can reduce the amount of calls that come into the call centre. We can put our FTE to dealing with vulnerable residents, disability residents, residents that struggle to communicate. But if we don't trust the organisation to start with, why are we going to trust the AI that they've just built to deploy and now talk to us? And I'm going to come straight to you, Colin, because I know you're a man of AI and you've just done something recently. So what's your thoughts on that, Colin? If the residents don't trust us to start with, why are they going to trust what we build for them going forwards? Especially when we go back to Ian's point there, where we're not actually explaining what we're doing as a sector. We're having difficulty with who are coming in. As you said, the money's beginning to dry up. It's getting less and less. And this stuff is not cheap to do.
I think it's really interesting question, and yes, we talk about AI considerably. The market is moving towards agentic AI and virtual agents, and what does that mean? But I don't necessarily think it's AI. I don't think it's that they don't trust AI. I think it's the trust of the outcome that's delivered, not actually what the AI does. And I think, I don't ever kind of experience customers going, oh, that was brilliant AI. It was, did the repair get raised that I wanted to get raised? Did it collect the information that I expected it to? Did it remove some of the friction from the journey? And I think that's the bit where we start to think about, where does AI exist? And AI isn't here to remove work from people. It's actually here to push forward our colleagues and just remove some of the friction around the edges, so that they can have better conversations with customers and deliver the experience without some of the associated noise, whether that's searching across systems, knowledge, those kind of things. And I don't think it's whether customers trust the AI algorithm as such. I think it's more about, do customers trust organizations that essentially make their life easier? And AI can play a part in making people's lives easier, whether that's customers or our colleagues. It's just the outcome of that. If we get the outcome right, customers shouldn't even feel the AI. And I think that's a real big misconception, because everyone's frightened. A lot of people are frightened of it. But the reality is, it should just complement your service and take away some of that friction. And one of my biggest takeaways from delivering AI is, don't deliver AI first. Fix your broken processes, because if you don't fix your broken processes, all you will do is amplify those with AI, and then your customer experiences will have amplified failure in them.
I couldn't agree more. I talk a lot on the subject myself, and the first thing I always say is, well, how good's your data? Because actually AI is just the automation of something. So if you're doing it already manually, fantastic. We can put AI into that, because that worked really well. If you haven't do something manually, but you're going through 3, 4, 5 different sources because we're not quite sure, we need to go and validate, and we need to go and check that data, and we need to go back to another database, you're going to have a lot of problems, and you're going to get hallucinations all over. And absolutely, I totally agree. I think that's a really nice way of putting it. Look, we've talked a lot about evidence and what residents are thinking, what boards are thinking, and how we're all thinking within the sector. I want to change the format slightly. For the next part of the conversation, I'm going to put some broad questions to the panel. I'll ask one of you to kick it off, as usual, guys, as we sort of did in the pre-meet, just sort of 2 or 3 minutes each of you on the topic. And what I want to do is try and do this slightly differently. Instead of, we normally leave questions that are submitted by the sector right to the end of the questions and answers, but so some of these questions are really good, and I think they naturally fall into what we've just been talking about. So Elaine from Liverpool City Council submitted a really interesting question. And I'd like Kerry to sort of pick this one up to start with. But how do we show customers that their voice leads to real change when long-term strategies make little impact day to day? It's a really good question, it is.
Yeah.
So Kerry, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would slightly reframe the idea that it's a short-sighted view. I think customers understandably judge change through experience in their own lives, and a long-term strategy may be important, but it doesn't build that confidence unless customers can see and feel it in practice. We're actually doing our corporate strategy currently, and we have so much data, and we've got these 4 big topics that came out of customer journey mapping, that come out of complaints, that come out of our TSMs, all of these 4 main issues, and it's about going back to the customers, and we're going to do a big engagement and just ask them to prioritize that, what they think is most, and how that would help them to feel differently about the service. And it's always about closing the loop. So taking that information back, understanding it, digesting it, and then pushing it back out again, and throw the net even wider to see if that is what the case is. I think for customers, they need to feel differently, and we need to understand how we're going to do that.
Nice. Are we sometimes guilty as a sector of asking residents for feedback more often than we're actually able to demonstrate what we're actually going to use it for and how it's going to change?
I think this is a great question, and it's something that I picked up recently. And if we think about like tenant satisfaction measures and transactional surveys, we ask customers for that feedback, and we look at what those measures are. They might be, overall satisfied, but when you start to look in the comments, they might say that repair wasn't done properly, or this didn't happen. And where we're looking at sometimes always formal engagement, actually, why aren't we getting in front of it? Why aren't we picking up the phone and saying, you've given us this feedback, and we hear that your repair or rubbish hasn't been taken out your house. Can we arrange for that to be done? And I think as a sector, we gather all of this information and insight, and I look at it every day, but it's actually, and that I do believe will build trust. It's actually we're giving you feedback. We're telling you that I'm not happy, but you're not doing anything. So what's the point? And I think we do, it's not going to ever stop complaints, but it's just about customers feeling heard.
Awesome, thank you. Hopefully that will be a good response, and they will enjoy that answer. Ian, I'm going to jump across to you because one of our most regular contributors, Oliver at Magna Housing, has come up with a topic that I think is just perfect for you. So Alice, Oliver asked whether recent regulatory changes and increased scrutiny are genuinely helping build trust with residents, or whether they are simply helping organisations become more compliant.
Yes, to both, I suppose, is the short answer. I think I was thinking back to the early 2000s, those of us who were around, you had the key lines of inquiry, and that became really formulaic of everybody doing these key lines of inquiry. Most people probably don't know what I'm talking about. But we all sort of chased the same things, became very compliance driven. And I think we've gone back to that point now, and it just worries me a little bit that we've got so much regulation now and so much legislation, and we're about to go into phase 2 of Awaab's law. And I think that's going to drive this even more, where we're just running really hard just to comply with what legislation states. And I'm not entirely convinced at all times that's for the best outcome. Sometimes it's just to be compliant. So it really does worry me, in that I think there's a risk we're going to lose sight of the right things to do for customers. Because if we just chase regulation all the time, then that's what it takes, because what gets measured gets done. But if you're a customer and you say your organisation's been given a C1, C2, C3, 4, what does that mean to them? How is that and what does that mean in comparison to somebody else? And what can you do about it unless you move to another housing provider? So I'm not entirely convinced that this provides the best outcomes for customers. But interesting you asking earlier about the board. Look at our board agenda. Well, you obviously won't see it, but our board agenda for next week is over 1,000 pages. I bet 3% of that agenda is dedicated to customers. There's finance on there, regulation, assessments against how we're doing against different codes. Honestly, it's because it's this time of year as well. But that just shows you the volume boards are dealing with just to maintain regulatory compliance with what the sector wants, rather than actually what outcomes are being driven for customers. So that's just a bit of an insight, and it just sort of really struck home when I was reading through the board papers this week. As a board member, how do you cope with all that? Because operational is the new strategic, or strategic is the new operational, I should say. We're asking our board members and leaders to deal with massive amounts of stuff, and just wonder, does it distract from what we really should be looking at? What really matters in the day, because we're here for customers. If we don't exist for them, then we don't exist for anything.
Absolutely, and I don't know many people, and I'd love to do a straw poll right now. How many people could read 1,000 pages, digest it, understand it? That's a big board paper. Good luck with that, Ian. Have fun. I won't be catching up with you next week.
It's this time of year, but everybody around this table, their board papers will be the same at this time of year.
And it's incredible that, as you said, 3% of that is dedicated, or even if it was 10%. 10% would be great. 10% being dedicated towards our customers who we're actually there to serve. As I feared, we're already beginning to run close on time. I do want to ask one very quick question. Maybe this is a bit of a straw poll. This is for everyone on the call. So you've all got the react button. I just want to ask one question, and you should have thumbs up and thumbs down. So obviously answer this either yes or no. Can an organisation meet every regulated requirement and still fail to make residents feel heard, respected, or valued? Just literally with your thumbs up, thumbs down. Just would love to know how that comes across. Interesting. There's so much we could explore in this, and I always say the same thing about the Housing Hive when we're sitting down with the team building this. I always think I never have enough time. 43 minutes just runs so quickly, it does, and it falls away. What I want to do is move across to some questions from the audience. I wanted to make sure I protected this time for the audience questions. Liv, I believe you're going to be my partner in crime on this.
Yes, so we've had a couple of questions. The first one was from Jason, and he said, do you think residents are more likely to trust a landlord when we are transparent about delays and mistakes rather than when we just focus solely on meeting targets? If so, how can we embed that culture across frontline services?
Ooh, who would like to take that one? That's a good question.
I'm happy to.
Thanks, Ian.
Yes, my experience with customers is they forgive us all sorts of things when we say sorry and we admit our mistakes. I can't believe how much we get away with at times in terms of being forgiven for that. But we have got pockets across the organisation where colleagues are constantly defending the organisation and sometimes defending the indefensible. And I always say to them, just admit it. If we've got it wrong, we've got it wrong. Just own it. And I think that goes a long way, because once you say sorry and you truly mean it and you are empathetic, then people generally are quite forgiving. But the big thing is, once you say, I will do something about it, and this is what I'll do, and when I'll do it, you absolutely fulfill that promise. Otherwise, then I think trust is possibly lost forever with that person that you've been dealing with.
That's an awesome link. I did a customer journey mapping on repairs, and I had probably 20 residents write exactly those words. Just do what you say you're going to do. Literally, they literally wrote those words, and that was their biggest issue. It wasn't that actually you'd missed the appointment. as in you turned up and they weren't there, or you had tried to fix it but you couldn't fix it. It was the fact that you just didn't do what you said you were going to do, and they found that much harder to deal with. Next question, Liv.
The next one is from Alicia. It kind of ties into something that you just said there, Ian, but owning it is often presented as a key organisational value, but residents can experience services differently depending on who they speak to on the front line. How do organisations move from owning it as a slogan to a consistent experience across services that residents can trust?
Wow, Kerry, sounds like read down to you that one.
I mean, I think we need to, with ownership, it's such a big, somebody needs to hold that case. Somebody needs to really understand, and you need proper handovers. You know, I've done, it was off the back of a customer journey mapping with Zach, and it was a repairs. It was a repairs journey, and I had about 6 different repairs that I needed to sort out after that. And it does feel like you're pushing it into the ether, and there's no feedback. There's no, I've picked this up, or I'm doing this, or the customer's repair has been booked. And it's about that two-way conversation, that you're handing over the baton to somebody, and somebody within the organization is saying, I've got this. This is in my hands and I'm sorting it. It is very much cultural, and I think systems don't always help. We can't always see visibly what's happening and who has that baton and who doesn't. But I do think that it's communication internally, to know, for me as an individual, to think, right, that person's repairs booked. I don't have to think about that anymore.
Nice, very nice. Liv, any more questions?
Yes, we had one final one. How do you think housing associations are using digital tools and self-service portals to rebuild trust with residents, and where are they falling short?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. We could do an entire housing hive on that. We could. Who would like to pick that up? Colin, do you want to pick that one up, as it's quite digital enabled?
Yeah, sorry, let me just reread the question. I think it's such an interesting concept around the way that housing associations position digital tools and self-service portals. I think we talk about, I guess, the removal of friction, making it easy. But are we doing it for the right reasons is probably the one thing that I would say is a starting point for me within this, which is, are we doing it because we want organizational efficiency, or are we doing it because we want to actually improve our customer experience? And then how do we rebuild trust through that? Well, as an organization, or organizations historically, we tend to implement technology and we deliver it to our colleagues and our customers. So one of the changes that we made when we went through some of our AI transformation is we brought customers into the development and the journey. And I think that's how you start to rebuild some of the trust with those kind of aspects of bringing in self-service portals or utilizing digital tools, is don't design and develop them as an organization. Develop them alongside and with your customers, because your customers will see the things that you don't, and they will highlight the things that work for them, whereas you will highlight the things that work for efficiency, for the outcome that you want for the organization, which more than often is not is, if we're going to invest in this technology, we want an ROI, not what is the customer experience. And I think involving customers in that journey, be brave, bring them on board, and let them start forming those kind of tools in and around you, and you'll get the best of both worlds then, what drives efficiency for the organization and what is the best for the customer, and then organically you've built that trust.
Yeah, and it's just a side point from that, because when we did the customer journey, we did one on customer payments, because eventually in a year's time we're going to get all the foundations right, and then look at a system. And I think sometimes we have an idea of our customers that they might not want digital, and they might, whatever. But when we actually, so we can't pay, or a customer can't pay for their rent online, they have to ring up, which is really frustrating. So we sent out a survey and said, would you want something where you could self-serve? Are you digitally able? What your age was? And actually, resoundingly, even older people were quite happy to self-serve, and that's what they wanted. And there were concerns about security and those other things, but actually going and getting that feedback, I think sometimes we have quite a blinkered view of our customer, and our customers are perfectly able to do things and to properly, like you say, Colin, co-create with somebody, not have these preconceived ideas of what will work and what work. True co-creation, sitting in a room and saying, this is what we want, this is what we want, and have a hybrid method.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me in a lot of this has been that when we've sat down and we've listened, customers aren't comparing us to other housing providers. Customers are comparing us to the bank, and comparing us to the energy provider who has an app that they can go on and they can see their balance and they can look at their usage. And that's the bit that's starting to shift, is that we do more and more in the world, and in a digital place, and we often make the mistake of going, well, the people that aren't digitally enabled, have we asked, have we understood, and then have we given them options and opportunity? And we always will cater for customers that aren't digitally enabled, but the reality is, if we're not asking and we're not understanding, we're not involving, then we're just creating something that is for ROI purposes only and not for customer experience.
Beautifully put, both of you, beautifully put. And I've seen it from my side. I've spent 35 years in product development. My background is I build products. That's what I do. I love to build products, and I can guarantee you the best products I've ever built in my life have not been built by me or by my team. They've been built by the people that we've worked with, be it customers, be it the contractors, whoever it is. You said it so well. They see the bits that we don't see. And it's so true. It doesn't make a difference who it is, if it's a resident, if it's a contractor, if it's a staff member. Bring them into that process. They will tell you far more than your product team ever would have established. They can go and do 110,000 workshops. I'll still go and sit with a resident. I wouldn't show the product to a resident and say, what do you think? Is that going to work? Oh, no, I don't know. I don't like the size of that. In fact, I actually built a product and it was for use on the oil rigs. And it was beautiful. I spent all this time designing it. It was the most beautiful looking product in the world. And then I took it out onto the oil rigs, and the big burly guys who have got thumbs 10 times the size of mine couldn't press the buttons. Simple user experience, but that's how it works. Guys, I know we're already running out of time, so I'm going to I should come back to a bit of closing reflections, and I would like to finish off with one question for each of you. Same question. If you can just give me 60 seconds on the answer. I'll start with Ian, then I'll move to Colin, and I'll let Kerry finish it off. Question: if you could ask housing providers to do one thing differently over the next 6 months to rebuild resident confidence, what would it be?
Wow, probably 6 months. It probably needs longer. I just wish we could come together as a sector and collectively design and procure some decent IT systems once and for all, because I think we're badly served as a sector, and I don't think we've done anywhere near enough collaboratively and collectively to determine what we want, go to the market and demand it, and get the right thing. I think we've all done our own individual thing, and I think we've ended up with a patchwork of stuff that is just bang average, if I'm really honest.
Agree 100% with that. I mean, 100% agree. And Colin?
Absolutely agree on the system front wholeheartedly. I think mine would be organisationally stop talking about how we improve customer experience and start talking about how do we become easier to trust. Think about, those conversations. What does it mean to simplify our journeys? What does it mean to take away the handoffs? What are in essence, what are those things that will start to build that trust, not erode it? Because customer experience is great. Customer experience is a measurement, but we very rarely measure trust. So we need to change the narrative, and we need to start talking about it.
And Kerry, to wrap us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think part of that is that customer feedback in whatever guise needs to be looked at, worked on, have predictive measures. It's about trying to get in front of the issue and not continuously being on the back foot that customers feel like they need to raise a complaint for you to resolve anything. We had a really good, very quick example was that we had a whole load of issues with boilers not being covered over, and we kept on getting complaints about that. And it's about that predictive, proactively going in and contacting the customers that we know that we changed a process and something happened, and say, right, we're booking you in to do this. I think we go around putting out loads of fires, but I think we need to try and get better at looking ahead.
Interesting. I've got 3 minutes, or 2 minutes, in fact, to wrap this all up. So firstly, thank you. As we've heard today, trust is surprisingly difficult to define. It isn't a policy. It isn't a project. It certainly isn't something that can be achieved just because we've met regulatory requirements. It's something that's earned. And when we don't earn it, we erode it. Often through hundreds of small moments. We've heard from the panel today saying, keep your promise, be honest when things go wrong, explain decisions early. And every single person on this call would be in exactly the same position. I'm about to go and build a boat. Oh, actually, I've got no wood. Okay, do you know what? If my wood supplier told me that earlier, I would have thought, okay, I'm going to go and build it out of fiberglass instead. If I know this stuff, I can make decisions. I can start acting a lot earlier. And we need to start explaining decisions clearly, listening properly. And I think probably the most important thing, or the thing I've heard, helping residents feel that their voice genuinely matters and that speaking up leads to something that actually changes. One thing that really struck me during today's conversation was the discussion of that this isn't about rebuilding trust, isn't the responsibility of just one team. It's not just customer services, it's not communication, it's not repairs. Every single comment we've had has been from different departments, different opinions, different areas of the business. And it's something that runs through every single conversation, every decision, every interaction that we have with a resident. If today's discussion has encouraged us all to reflect a little differently on where trust is won, where it's lost, and what each of us can do differently when we go back to work tomorrow, I think we've achieved exactly what the Housing Hive was created for. Start of that conversation. Kerry, Colin, Ian, thank you. These conversations do not happen without people like you giving up your time to come and actually be honest and be open. You've all been open. Ian, 3% of your boards about your residents. I mean, I know it's a particular part right now, but that's honesty, and that helps everyone else and helps people in the sector understand what boards are also going through themselves. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. Thank you for your questions and contributions in the chat. It's always, this is what makes these things so interesting, and really, to me, they make this a bit of a passion for us at Prodo. This is our 25th year, and we're doing a little something special. Claire will be sending out a little message to everyone that joined the conversation today, partakes and asked a question. And it's just us giving a little thank you back to the sector. As I say, always at the end of this, guys, thank you very much. Have an amazing day. And without you, this is never possible. So thank you all. It really is important to us. Take care and have an amazing day.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Natalie.
Bye.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone. Goodbye.